The tremors from Tianjin are still being felt. The tremors of that picture, that photograph of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, the President of China, Xi Jinping, and the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, meeting on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Leaders Summit. They've shaken the power center in Washington, D.C. U.S. President Donald Trump has fired off a fresh barb on social media platform Truth Social, saying America had lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. India's response? Pure diplomatic cool. The spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, Additional Secretary Ranadhir Jaiswal, he brushed it off, saying no comments. At the SCO summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi stood tall alongside world leaders, and this was a display of India's independent foreign policy. India will not let the United States dictate where we buy oil from. But a bit that the Ministry of External Affairs did talk about was US continued attacks on these pictures of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in China with the Chinese president and the Russian president. Remember Peter Navarro, his recent statements, India said these are unacceptable. So while Donald Trump may see loss, India is playing a global engagement game. Whether it's Washington, D.C., India remains engaged. Moscow, India's engagement remains very deep, and engagement with Beijing is on India's terms too. Now, because the fact remains, New Delhi's made one thing very clear. India is not about any bloc or being a part of any bloc. It's all about keeping India first.
We have seen the inaccurate and misleading statements made by Mr. Navarro, and obviously we reject them. As far as India-United States relations are concerned, प्रणय, ये हम लोगों ने पहले भी कहा है कि दोनों देशों के बीच में एक कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव ग्लोबल स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप है, और हम चाहते हैं कि इस पार्टनरशिप को जो मुद्दे तैयार किए गए हमारे बीच में, एक सब्सटेंटिव एजेंडा जिसको बनाया गया है, उस पर काम करके हम इसको आगे ले जाएं, दोनों देशों के बीच में एक आपसी समझ के साथ, दोनों के शेयर्ड इंटरेस्ट के साथ, और साथ ही साथ म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट के साथ.
But let's try and decode the Truth Social message of US President Donald Trump. What did he say? Looks like we've lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. What should one make of this? Joining me on this India Today special broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. He's a distinguished scholar of international security and strategic studies. Joins us from the Macalester College in the United States. Sushant Sareen is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Siddharth Zarabi, managing editor, Business Today, joins me on this broadcast. Tatiana Kokhareva is a senior journalist who joins us from Moscow, and Andrew K.P. Leung is a China strategist and analyst joining us on this broadcast, and we'll continue this conversation. I first want to cut across to India Today's Rohit Sharma joining us live from Washington, D.C. Rohit, what should one make of Donald Trump's message? He's been in the line of fire, especially after the Tianjin SCO summit. In the US, he's been criticized for pushing India closer to China and Russia instead of nurturing a relationship that both India and the US had invested so heavily in the past 25 years. But how is his message being analyzed in the US, Rohit?
Well, we're just waking up to what he posted here in Washington, D.C., and I was just looking at some of the comments coming in from the sources I've had at the White House, and they make it pretty clear that it's the President of the United States who obviously was keeping a very close eye on what the developments in Asia, and he was obviously taking a look at those photo ops and those pictures and the pictures that we're showing, and he's consulted, with a lot of people around him. And this morning he decided that he wanted to put out that message and give a clear message and sort of warning to both Russia and India. And remember, this is the same president who says that he has a great relationship with Prime Minister Modi. He has a great relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. So I think it's a little personal for him to see those images coming out from China. Number two, I think, and I know it for a fact now, and I can confirm from one of my sources, that the Americans believe that there would be a trade deal. As of this morning, they think there would be a trade deal in the next month or two, and then it's on President Trump, on how he wants to deal with those tariffs and whatnot. So it could be seen as another diplomatic push, not the one that India would like to see, a pressure tactic. But again, President Trump making it very clear that he's taken note of all those images that have been on social media and flooded wall-to-wall coverage here in the United States.
Okay. Siddharth, your reading of the Trump post, India's very calm response to all the rants that came from the MAGA ecosystem in the past 1 month. Is Donald Trump increasing pressure, or is he looking for an off-ramp?
Bullseye. I think that's the best word to describe what the US president is feeling. He and his aides have pushed India into a corner and driven it out of sight as far as America is concerned. Nobody did that. And the point that you made, Gaurav, very good point, that we've been calm and responsible in all our communications. We haven't ranted like many of Trump's aides have. And therefore, this single biggest foreign policy failure, I'm not saying this, go through any responsible spokesperson or a foreign policy expert from the United States, and they're calling it the single biggest foreign policy failure in recent times of the United States. And for what? For things that are completely unfounded in fact and are actually fiction in many ways. And I think this reflection of the fact that forget trade, but you are now put the very future of a well-crafted alliance at stake for purposes which are not clear to anyone. And therefore today his tweet is basically acknowledgement of the fact that there is no method in the madness that we have seen from the US in the recent past.
Okay, stay with me, Siddharth. Professor Latham, looks like we've lost India and Russia to the deepest and darkest China. May they have a long and prosperous future together. What's the message in your view, sir?
Well, the message is, of course, that Donald Trump doesn't understand geopolitics, diplomacy, certainly doesn't understand India. But I would also say this by way of framing. This is just froth on the top of the ocean. If we look at the deep currents, the actually important things, the structural things that are taking place, the relationship between India and the United States remains firm. Whether it's economics, now we know that there'll be a deal done, a trade deal done, whether it's defense relations or defense industrial relations, these continue apace. These have not been derailed, they've not been reversed, they've not been upended. It is the case, and this is something that President Trump can't understand. This is a multipolar world, and India has a long history of multi-alignment, what is called in India strategic autonomy. They're going to do, surprise, surprise, what is in the best interests of India. Sometimes that means doing a deal with China. Sometimes it means cozying up to Russia. And over the last 25 years, it has increasingly meant tightening relations with the United States. But the statement made by that Indian official that we don't belong to any bloc is true, and it's something that President Trump can't understand. But I do want to draw a distinction between the stuff that comes out on Truth Social and the stuff that comes out of Foggy Bottom, which is where the State Department is, and the Pentagon. And those are very different signals being sent, and they reflect very different relationships. Trump doesn't get it. The State Department.
But the Foggy Bottom does. You're absolutely right. That's the signal we've also been picking up, whether it's the Pentagon or Foggy Bottom. Very clearly, they've signaled their efforts are as much as India's efforts to keep the relationship on an even keel, even if White House may send other signals. But Sushant Sareen, when Trump writes, may they have a long and prosperous future together, is that an indication that the deal hasn't worked out? Trump's adding more pressure, or would you see this as, if not furious backpedaling, some kind of off-ramp or an off-ramp attempt by Trump?
I don't think we have any indication whether Trump is trying to take an off-ramp. And if the reports coming out of Washington are to be believed, even though the last deal that had been struck, put on Trump's table, had been rejected by him, certain new proposals were made, even those were rejected by him. So I'm not even sure if he wants a deal with India. So people who are saying that maybe a month from now we will get a deal, I'm not so sure of that. Secondly, I think Professor Latham is correct up to a point. The only my point of disagreement with him is that uh, regardless of what Foggy Bottom may or may not want to do, if the President of the United States and the White House doubles down on its folly of alienating India and breaking off all relations with India, burning this house down, I don't see how the State Department can stop him from doing that. We've seen that in the past. 71, for example, I keep going back to it. The entire American civil society, media, think tanks, everybody, even the political sphere was anti the genocide that Pakistan was carrying out in East Pakistan. But the White House, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon backed Pakistan. There was very little anybody could do about it. So that is the second. And the third and the most critical point is I see this partly as frustration that all his threats have not worked, and partly as a threat. And I see this as a possibility that he might, in the next couple of days, maybe by tomorrow morning, who knows which side of the bed he gets up tomorrow morning, he might be coming after both India and Russia because he has clearly put us in China's camp now. Whether we are in China's camp or not is another matter. But he has decided in his mind in his mind space that India is now clubbed with China and that he must punish India because he can't do nothing to China. So he has to come after India. I don't know what they are planning to do in Russia. But quite clearly, this is not something which augurs well. I think we are sliding down, this slope, and we are on the edge of the precipice.
Okay. So, the next 3 years, or at least the next, in the short and medium term, India-US relations are not improving, irrespective of what South Bloc and Foggy Bottom of the State Department seem to indicate that there could be a deal in October or November. But Andrew K.P. Leung, is the indication very clear that Donald Trump is rattled by the images that came out of Tianjin? He did confess that he was watching China's military parade live. He found it impressive, but he says the American army is the strongest. It's a battle-hardened army. But the optics of the pictures of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Xi Jinping and President Putin together, and he's put out one of those pictures on social media. Your appreciation of what Trump wrote?
Behind all these optics are two important dynamics. Firstly, President Trump, of course, is hell-bent on making America first, and he believes that America has the power and capacity to bend the whole world to the will and to the interests of the United States. Kind of using coercion and a tariff war, left, right, and center, not only against Americans' traditional enemies like China and Russia, but its long-existing allies like India and also the transatlantic relationship countries in Europe. So he's upending the whole world order, and that creates a disruption affecting a lot of countries in the Global South, particularly the key players, including China, Russia, and India, and other countries in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to rally together, not to form a bloc against the United States, because I don't think many countries want to make an enemy of the United States, but to recalibrate the relationship. Now, the second dynamic is one has to hark back to the very wise forewarning of Agnew Brzezinski, who was a doyen of American foreign policy. In his seminal book, well, let's not forget he was the mentor of Henry Kissinger. So in his seminal book in 1997, which was what was called the Grand Chessboard, and if you read the Grand Chessboard on page 55, he did warn that the greatest threat to American dominance to American hegemony would be if the countries like Russia, China, and Iran were forming together into a closer alliance. Now, these countries are now being pushed together, including, of course, India. Not so much the European Union, but you can see that the upticks in the SCO summit. Definitely, Russia, China, India are being pushed together into not exactly a bloc, but creating more opportunities for mutual cooperation and coordination of their responses against American unilateralism.
And you think that goes beyond optics, and I'll come to you to respond to that. But Tatiana, when President Trump and President Putin met in Alaska, there were indications that talks may just move in a positive direction. But post Tianjin and Beijing, is Donald Trump signaling all his efforts have failed? And is he being sarcastic when he says, I wish you all well, and I've lost India and Russia to China?
Gaurav, I completely disagree in the part where, this is... The one thing we need to remember about Donald Trump is that whatever he does say, he says primarily to the American audience. So he is not speaking to audiences abroad first and foremost. He's speaking to the domestic audience. The other thing that we keep forgetting is that Donald Trump likes to convey a certain image of himself. So to me, the word for this is two words, actually: damage control. He likes to portray this, all-powerful persona, and this, to me, is exactly what it is. So he is trying to take back some of the power to come out of this, somewhat vilifying both India and Russia, putting it in the China camp, because we remember that China is the all evil for Donald Trump. He operates in black and white usually. It's again, it's the simplest story that sells the best, especially to his demographic, the people who voted for him, and the people that he is speaking to. Mr. Sushant Sareen disagrees. I can feel that. So to me, this does not necessarily mean, first of all, it doesn't mean that any type of negotiations with Russia are off. Okay. You remember the rants that went on before it was announced that the two presidents will meet in Alaska, him saying that, calling our president, Mr. Vladimir Putin, crazy, and going on unimaginable rants. And yet the meeting happened. So this is, again, him playing social media. It is just like when he claimed all of the responsibility for resolving India and Pakistan tensions, taking the two countries to the negotiating table and resolving the crisis. He likes to portray a certain image, and this is damage control and him trying to claim the remains of the power in the situation and come out with a strong image in the U.S.
Okay, Sushant Sareen, okay, were you disagreeing with Tatiana as she fears? But is this damage control on his part that somehow he wants to see if the relationship can still be revived? Because both in Washington, D.C. and New Delhi, there seems to be an indication that efforts are on for some kind of a trade deal by October, November, and perhaps if this 25% additional tariffs or the sanctions are taken off, and it's anywhere between 15 to 20%, the deal is still workable.
The deal would be workable even at 25. But the point is, I would be more than happy if Tatiana is proven right and I am proven wrong. I would not shed any tears about my being proven wrong. But the problem is this. One, if he is trying to do damage control, he's the guy who did the damage. It's not one of his flunkies who did it, right? He's the guy with his social account and his constant refrain to India, Pakistan, and all sorts of other things. He's the guy who has destroyed this relationship. So whom is he blaming for when he says that we have pushed India and Russia? Secondly, and this is more important, Look at what has been happening in Europe, yes, the last 2, 3 days. The Europeans have been actually doubling down on a very, very hard line against Russia. Now, the question is, are the Europeans saying that, okay, fine, if the Americans are not coming on board on pressing Russia, we will go it alone and the United States loses Europe? And has Trump chickened out because he doesn't want to lose Europe? So he has said, okay, fine, Russia and India have gone China's way. The Russians are not listening to me. President Putin remains stuck up on his maximalist position. I have tried to negotiate. I haven't been successful.
Okay.
And so fine, if these guys want to go with China, best of luck to them. Which means that he will then take the European line. It will be the tail wagging the dog. And he will, do what the Europeans want him to do, which means more trouble for Russia and more trouble for us, and perhaps even for China.
You know, the European Commission, and there are reports, Siddharth, that are coming out from Brussels that seem to indicate that the European Commission is working on a legislation, no Russian oil by 2028. At the same time, they are under pressure, according to these reports from the United States, that I've put 50% sanctions on India, you still continue to buy Russian oil, either reduce that or end that, though it's all about Russian oil and not gas. But Siddharth Zarabi, India also did not respond to all the rants that were coming from the United States. You also heard Piyush Goyal. How is India still hopeful of a deal by October, November, when everything seems to indicate that either Trump is doubling down or he's washing his hands off this situation?
All along, Gaurav, the Indian negotiating team has taken the stance that we will ignore the noise and focus on the substance. Although some would argue that it's become increasingly difficult for negotiators and decision makers in India to always ignore the noise, because this noise is pretty much bordering on the levels of insanity. Why is President Trump saying what he is, and is he feeling rattled? I just want to bring in some breaking news data that's just come out in the United States virtually minutes ago. Payrolls have fallen, unemployment has increased. In fact, 12,000 jobs have been lost in the politically sensitive manufacturing sector in the United States. A combination of tariff policies. If the US says that it's got $30 billion in tariff revenue, ultimately a US customer will end up paying them directly or indirectly. And therefore, on the question of trade, I think now it will be not a question of the Russian 25% additional penalty being taken off and the original 25 coming down to 15. I would say that given this experience of 6 months, our negotiators will approach any further conversation with a great deal of caution, because remember, the US Trade Representative's report is full of tariff and non-tariff allegations and questions, and you now have H-1B visa, you have Brahmin caste, you have everything being thrown into the mix. I don't think it's going to be as simple. India remains sincere. Okay. That is very much clear. The ball is now on the American side.
Okay. Professor Latham, how is Donald Trump reacting to the criticism that comes his way that he's singularly responsible for destroying a relationship? Republicans and Democrats had both invested in this relationship for 25 years, and the fact that India making it very clear India cannot be punished with this additional 25% tariffs for Trump and Europe's failure to get Russia-Ukraine ceasefire in place, and the fact that Siddharth Zarabi just pointed out there are job losses in the United States. There are some reports that seem to indicate that economists in the US are saying that inflation could go higher, and that could lead to stagflation in the US, and it's the US buyers who are paying for this additional tariff.
Well, that's certainly the case. I think it's important not to catastrophize on the basis of one set of numbers that come out 1 month. That doesn't tell us very much. But tariffs, generally speaking, are bad for the global economy. They're bad for everybody, except for certain narrowly protected sectors. But what I would say is this, too. Can you imagine, this is a thought experiment, a slightly different world in which Donald Trump didn't say anything disparaging about India and didn't slap on any of these tariffs? Does anybody really think that the SCO meeting would have looked that different? because I don't. I think India's policy of strategic autonomy would have led to the handshakes with Putin and led to the hugs and kisses with Xi Jinping. I don't think anything would have changed. When I look at this relationship, I look at interests and deep structures, not at people of dubious intelligence who happen to be in the White House at the moment and have very little self-discipline. And I don't look at numbers that pop up and pop down and pop up. I look at long-term trends. I look at the last 25 years, and I say to myself, India is doing what it has always done since independence, which is do what's best for India and align with whomever on whatever issue suits its national interests. That's the rational thing to do. It's what I would do. It's what anybody with a sense of responsibility to their country would do. Unfortunately, it's not what President Trump is doing.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. But Andrew K.P. Leung, there are some voices in the United States say shouldn't get very rattled by these images that come out from Beijing. These are only optics, and optics that have been very carefully choreographed. This isn't statecraft, it's actually stagecraft intended to send across a message. India and China will never be friends. Their trade at best will remain limited. And those essential disagreements, and not just on border, but even on India getting greater access to Chinese markets, all of those issues will remain. So US has no reason to worry.
Of course, this is a carefully choreographed optics, and it's not just optics. The dynamics that we have just we've discussed just now is shifting and in a historical way. Away from the American dominance hegemony towards a greater degree of cooperation and understanding amongst countries in the Global South. But as far as the optics are concerned, don't forget it coincides with the military parade in Tianjin and showcasing some of the state-of-the-art weaponry, long-distance hypersonic missiles, and also sixth-generation aircraft, in the sense that China is now very able to defend its development interests, and it's touting itself to be the guardian of a more multipolar world. It has the capacity to do it militarily, economically, and also diplomatically. And as far as the tariffs are concerned, China is a unique country that is most able to withstand these tariffs in the sense that it has got a stranglehold over Americans' Achilles heel, the rare earths. I'm not talking about supply, I'm talking about processing. China controls over 95% of the processing of these rare earths, which find an indispensable ingredient in a variety of products, including military hardware, such as F-35 fighters. So I think that this is a very powerful weapon China has in its hands, but I think that the idea is not to confront the United States, but to rally with other countries in the Global South so as to change the world order, not to change it, but to preserve the old world order based on a more rule-based system, based on other countries' sovereignty, as well as development interests, rather than being
coerced. Do you see this way? China with its weapons, because some of the commentary from the United States seem to indicate that there's a big difference between weapons that are used on parade and the weapons that are used in war. One of the American generals, or a former general, said that the American army is the most battle-hardened army and not the Chinese army that last fought several decades ago and did not emerge on top. But be that as it may, how would you see the signaling that's coming out from Beijing and from Washington, D.C.? Now, India has been very clear. You heard Piyush Goyal, hopeful of a deal by October, November, but not saying a nasty word about what Trump says, but hitting out at Peter Navarro and others and exposing them on whatever wrong they say.
So, Gaurav, I'll make three very quick points. One, on the bad news which Siddharth has said has come in Washington. That's not a problem for Donald Trump. He'll just sack the guy and bring in a new guy and get good news next week or next month. Not a problem at all. right? And the White House can spin whatever bad news comes in a way that it sounds like good news. They've been doing it. So that's not a problem. The second is on this whole business of the Chinese military. Look, yes, certainly on paper, technologically, the Chinese military is very advanced. They've made some great strides, and they have actually taken aback a lot of people. But yes, I think the American point of view is also right, that the American military is very, very competent. It is battle hardened. It has fought wars. It knows how to fight wars. And the Chinese have still not tested themselves on a battlefield, and that's everything. And finally, on this whole business of, yes, Chinese currently enjoy a monopoly over rare earths. But remember when OPEC started blackmailing the world with oil monopoly? What did it do? It led to creation or exploration of new oil resources, a greater economy, and within a couple of years, the OPEC wasn't able to hold the world to ransom.
Yes.
And I suspect some of that is likely to happen in the next few years. But in that period, let's not forget that the Chinese are advancing very, very quickly and very fast. So maybe they will have other tools and other leverages which they currently don't have. And maybe rare earths might not be their leverage 3 years, 5 years from now.
Okay.
They might have something else. Let's wait and see.
But for that, the United States would need more friends, more allies, and everything that Donald Trump seems to do alienates not just friends, but even allies. Look at how miffed countries like Japan and several countries in the European Union are, or South Korea feeling miffed. India is being alienated by America. Tatiana, what are Russia's red lines for a ceasefire? Because that was Donald Trump's big effort. He said, even before I come into White House, there'll be a ceasefire. Until date, there isn't one. President Putin's made it very clear, no NATO-like security guarantees. That's out of the question. No foreign forces on Ukrainian soil. All of that he's made very clear. That's not acceptable to Trump. So does that indicate that the Russia-Ukraine war will go on till both start talking to each other?
Well, Gaurav, first of all, I just like to mention that, Japan is a very bad example of an ally in terms of the relationship between the two since the American occupation. There's one thing that you see, on the surface, but if you talk to people within Japan and even the political class within Japan, you'll hear a very different story. It's just such a complicated issue to even begin with. But also, when we talk about the red lines, we need to understand they haven't changed a bit since day one. Moscow needs a neutral status for Ukraine. Moscow needs to not even hear the word NATO and the words NATO and Ukraine in the same sentence. Has been very clear. I don't believe that. I do believe actually that Donald Trump understands this. We've seen the pictures. We've seen how the two presidents spoke. I don't think that, again, we can judge what Donald Trump does or does not think by the madness that is his social media feed. I think that there are some things that have been discussed and that have been agreed upon. We just haven't heard about them yet. There seems to be a sort of an understanding between the two, and you can also judge by the amount of nervous energy coming out of Europe and from Kiev as well. Any time that something like this is discussed. But you've heard everything that happened after Alaska, everything that has been said. There is no talk about a ceasefire just yet.
And there is no question of a ceasefire if situation remains the way it does. But what should one make of Donald Trump saying, the US has lost India and Russia to China, deepest, darkest China? We'll continue to track this story very closely. To all my guests, many thanks for joining me. India celebrates the festival of Onam, a colorful celebration that commemorates the return of King Mahabali. Onam is a 10-day-long harvest festival celebrated across Kerala. India Today's Akshita Nandgopal tells us more about the festival, the reasons and the festivity, the reasons for the celebration and the festivities around Onam.
So long time back, there was a king, an Asura king called King Mahabali. He was hugely loved in his kingdom because anything his praja wanted, he would give to them. Anything they asked for, he would ensure their wish was granted. So they were extremely happy in his kingdom. The overlord saw this, got extremely jealous and said, we need to do something about King Mahabali. And that's when Lord Vishnu decided to step in. He took on the form of the dwarf Brahmin of Vamana and met with King Mahabali. And he had one appeal. He portrayed himself as a poor dwarf, went up to King Mahabali and said, can you please give me some land? How much land? King Mahabali asked him. He said, 3 steps, 3 of my steps, that much land if you can give it to me. Now King Mahabali said, what's wrong with that? Sure, I'll go ahead. In fact, his ministers advised him not to do so, but King Mahabali, being the generous soul that he was known to be, said, I will do it, and said he will give the land to Vamana. And that's when Lord Vishnu didn't take up just his real avatar, but became much bigger. His first step was the entire planet Earth. His second step was the universe. And just as he was about to take his third step, King Mahabali said, don't do it. Don't step on anything. Step on my head himself. And thereby he offered himself to Vamana. King Mahabali was then sent to Patalok. But Lord Vishnu was very impressed by King Mahabali, by how much he cared for his praja and all that he did to take care of his people. So when he asked King Mahabali, name one thing you want, one wish, King Mahabali said, I want to be able to visit my people. And so once a year, he's allowed to come and visit his people. That day is called Onam. And it is in preparation to welcome our favorite king, King Mahabali, that you see people gathering in large numbers and celebrating Onam even today. I think when we talk about Onam, we also need to be talking about all the memories we have with this beautiful festival. For so many of us Malayalis who celebrate Onam, it's a day filled with happy memories. I remember mine personally to be one from just a couple of years ago. It was a pandemic Onam at home here in Delhi, and my sister from the United States flew down, and we made this beautiful pookalam along with my husband inside home. With great difficulty got flowers. So that's a very memorable Onam for me. So we all as Malayalis come together to celebrate Onam. It doesn't matter if someone's Hindu, Christian, Muslim or any other faith. Onam is a cultural celebration of the traditions of Kerala. And what you'll see if you visit Kerala at this time of the year is a lot of colourful competitions. You'll see pookalams, flower arrangements all around. And of course, who can forget the delicious food, the sadhyas that's become a part and parcel of Onam. So this year, join us as we come together to celebrate Onam festivities across the country. Ellarkum Hridaya Naranya Onashasaka.
Well, that is all we have time for on this special broadcast. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.